All right, so we've talked about the key ingredients of precision marketing being permission-based marketing, and we're not going to spend a lot of time on that. There's plenty of books and information available on email marketing, opt-in, permission-based marketing. I'm just not going to spend much time there. I'm kind of assuming that that's old news for everybody. We're going to spend most of our time talking about effective storytelling in marketing and NLP techniques. So in terms of storytelling, we've all kind of known about storytelling since we were kids, but in terms of in marketing, I first ran across and was amazed by the results that I saw happening in the internet marketing arena that Frank Kern and others in the gurus in the internet marketing world were using. Frank Kern has a product that's I think sold out now called Mass Control, and Frank talks about how he generated something like, I think it was $23.8 million in the first 24 hours during these 3 launches combined. Well, that's a lot of product. I mean, this is thousands or tens of thousands of units in 24 hours. And of course, you probably double or triple that over the life of that product. But these are amazing amounts of product that are being sold by telling stories in videos, on sales pages, landing pages, in emails, etc. So that was kind of what got me realizing, there must be something really here if Frank Kern's doing this. And I'm not quite sure where all Frank learned some of this stuff. He talked a little bit about it, but I think he's good friends with John Carlton, and John Carlton is known also as a great copywriter who is recommended and effectively uses stories in his copy all the time. Well, be that as it may, the thing about interesting stories is they grab your attention, they gain your involvement, and they help you get past the noise and the ad filters. And they act as effective carrier waves for our marketing messages. Interestingly, they create the influence that we need to actually cause our marketing messages to get absorbed, to go to work, and to move minds in the direction that we need them to move to buy our product. NLP, or Neuro-Linguistic Programming, is something that's been around for many, many years. I first ran across it, probably earliest I can remember was Tony Robbins with his Personal Power course that I think I took back in the 1980s. It's been so long I've forgotten when I took it. But anyway, NLP's been around for a long, long time. It's a soft yet really powerful way to magnify the amount of influence that you have with certain words. But the way it works is, and we're going to talk about it, is by recognizing the maps that are already in the mind of your prospects and then framing up the situation and the context for your communications properly, and then anchoring to things that the prospect already knows, or create new maps and anchors. And we'll talk more about that, but it's extremely powerful when you combine this with story-based marketing. So the NLP is going to provide an understanding of how the mind stores and processes the information, and what we talk about mind maps, how to understand and modify them, framing up your context, creating and updating these maps, and then anchoring is a powerful tool. And the stories actually frame your product within a context that the user can really get and get their head wrapped around and fully understand. And they get pulled in and consumed. You don't have to push these stories that hard. Interesting stories and effective stories actually get pulled in by the user. They get read and consumed and absorbed much more fully than marketing messages ever will. And they effectively, if they're effective stories, they effectively lead people to the action and internal decisions that need to be made. So instead of pushing someone into making a decision, we want to lead them towards reaching the conclusion themselves and making their own decision, or at least thinking they made their own decision. It's much, much more effective way in today's interruption-based marketing world to go a different direction and really be effective. All right, so let's talk about some of the essentials of NLP. Start with just an understanding of how our associative memory works. Memory is really a network of these associations between all these objects, is the way I think of it in the mind. It's a complex network of associations connecting all kinds of facts, people, events, emotions, different things that have happened to us throughout our life together. And words connect in, pictures, images, sounds, smells, all this stuff's wired together. And everybody's network or memory is going to be quite, a little bit different than the next person's. So mine's going to be different than yours, and yours is going to be different than each of your prospects, but we all share some things in common, and those are things we'll learn to leverage. And understanding these associations can be extremely powerful when you are able to trigger them in believable ways. And this is not news to anybody. This is kind of review, but I want to make sure you understand, the basics here of how this associative memory is working. So let's talk about the concept of maps in NLP. Maps are internal representations of how the mind actually represents its view of reality. Okay, the mind creates these little maps, let's call them mind maps, of reality. And we each interpret what we're seeing through a filtration system that's comprised of our belief systems, our values, what we believe about the world, and what we compare against as our sensory systems are absorbing information. And as a result, we end up creating these maps and store them in our associative memory. So each person's mind map is going to be a little bit different, even for the same topic or word. And so if I say the word, for example, hotel, at this moment when I said it, hotels.com came to mind, probably because my son works there. But for you may have seen an image of a hotel room. You might have seen a building. Maybe you saw a casino in Las Vegas. I don't know, but as you can see how my crazy mind works, I'm thinking about gambling or something right now for some reason, but everybody's mind's going to interpret that word hotel a little bit differently. Okay, so it's just important to understand that these mind maps and these words or images all link together to people's internal maps. And those maps are either the way you want them to be, or they're not quite wired the way you want them to be, and we may have to rewire them to some extent, or we may have to create them completely from scratch. They may not exist in the minds of some of our prospects. So this is what I mean by these maps can be considered to be complete or partial, but just because they're complete doesn't mean they're built the way that you want the maps to be built about a given topic or a word or an image, what have you, concept. So when a person learns, their mind's always creating and updating these internal maps. And I think these maps are always being created, from the time we're born, all the way through our life, and they're always being updated. But maps are only created when we're receptive to it. Okay, let's talk about an example here. So I put this little example. I'm from Texas. Was born in Dallas, and grew up in Irving. We moved to Houston, and I've been around, all around the world, but good old Texas is something I'm familiar with. So let's talk about this, and maybe this will create some new mind maps for you, but I'm guessing many of these things you're familiar with. For example, you see here an image of oil wells and bulls and cowboy hats. Well, then there's words that I've put out around the perimeter of this state of Texas symbol. And so there's all kinds of associations just linked to this one thing, Texas. Okay, and there's words of Texas, there's imagery of Texas, there's Austin, there's NASA, there's, on and on and on. So there's visual cues, shapes, and words, and there's auditory cues, or the spoken word or the visual word, that are all going to anchor or link back to these mind maps. Okay? And we have these maps for everything that we have an experience with, whether it's visual or it's a word, whether it's written, whether it's verbal. All these things are interlinked together in our minds. And everybody's map looks a little different. This isn't, by the way, the exact map I would have drawn of Texas, and you probably have your own map of what you think Texas looks like, right? Everybody does. So as marketers, we are effectively map makers. And in marketing, we are makers of maps and we are editors of maps. So when our marketing is really most effective, we're creating new maps in the mind of our prospects about our product, about the world, how we want them to view things, how we want them to evaluate things, to make decisions in our favor. And we update old maps. Okay, we have a need to change maps that may be erroneous or incomplete. And we want to create linkages to new maps where possible, and add new linkages to exist between existing maps, and anchor words and imagery, back to our product or unlink things and overcome objections and questions and fears and worries. However, this sort of map-making thing that we need to do it only works when the recipient's mind is receptive. We can't force people to make maps for us. Okay, they have to be open, an open-minded kind of state in what I would call a map-making mode in order for us to do our map work. Okay, we can't make maps within a closed mind, and we can't force maps to be created or changed. All right, so this map-making has to take place when a person's receptive. And things that can hinder their receptivity level can be the state of mind that they're in, their beliefs, the values, the different way they, the rules they use to evaluate things, the scales they compare things to. You know, one person may think something's cheap, another person thinks it's expensive, another person thinks that it's irrelevant, you know, another person thinks that it's the best thing they've ever seen. Well, those are all different values. Everybody has different scales and beliefs that they use to judge or evaluate the incoming signals that go into their mind. And their state of mind controls, you know, which of these rules take precedence oftentimes. Now, some maps are hard-coded, meaning they're probably not changing. You know, you're probably not going to change my belief about, you know, whether I like rain, you know, or whether I like to go bass fishing, or whether I like to play poker, or whether there's just certain things that I've made up my mind about that you're not going to change no matter what you put in your marketing message. Okay? And on the other hand, there are many other maps that are incomplete or they're weaker maps. Okay? And all you have to do is expose the mind to these new map-making information, this relevant information, and the mind will go ahead and fill the map in, and it won't even think about it. The new information will just plop right into place, and it will not be filtered out. However, it has to get past that receptivity barriers of beliefs and values, etc. Well, guess what? Stories get their way past those belief systems and those value systems, because guess what? A story can be an imaginary thing that we just accept as something that's a story that's being told. Now, we're judging whether we believe it or not, obviously, but the reality is we're absorbing that story, and it's filling in some maps in that person's mind if they read the story and if they follow the story. That's why the story stuff is so powerful. You know, it may seem simple on the surface, but I'm telling you, I didn't really believe it when I first heard about it from Frank Kern, but because it was Kern, I thought about it. I thought, you know, I'm going to go find out for myself, ran my own experiments and dug into this deeper, did more experiments, and I was amazed at what I found. Okay, I was absolutely amazed. And the deeper I go, the more I learn about story-based marketing, the more I realize that we're just scratching the surface here on what's possible. So marketing's purpose is to fill in the proper maps. And by proper, I mean the maps that you need the prospect to have built in their mind in order to reach a conclusion internally to buy your product. Okay, and we want to create these maps, you know, obviously that are constructed in a way that leads the product down the decision-making path that we need them to go down in order to decide to buy our product. And we'll talk about, you know, more about that. So let's talk about another concept in NLP called anchoring. And this, guys, this is not something I made up. I'm going to give you all my references. You know, there's tons of information available you can go deeper on, but I'm trying to just hit the high points here. Anchoring are these internal links that are associated with external reality. In other words, we have links that are within our mind between these maps and between words and between pictures and imagery, and we associate those with our beliefs or, you know, our view of external reality vis-a-vis these maps. And these anchors associate our senses and perception systems to the maps, you know, through sight, sound, smell, all the different senses to these internal representations. And they link to things like the maps of our worldview, the state of mind that people can be in, and emotions. You know, some people, for example, you can say one word to them and you'll suddenly trigger an emotional reaction, and their state of mind suddenly changes and they become emotional, and it's clear that you triggered something, and sometimes you didn't even know it or you didn't even mean to, but it happens. Well, This anchoring is very, very powerful. And so the other thing you may know anchoring by is guilt by association. It's these associations can be both positive or negative. They're very, very powerful influencers. They oftentimes evoke very strong emotions or deep-seated beliefs. They connect with very complex belief and value systems. And so it enables us to convey very complex, deep emotional messages by example, by simply stating an example. And I'm gonna take you through some that we all probably heard more of than we wanted here in the recent election. But let's talk a little bit about how this NLP stuff works. Now, I created this this view of how this works. This is not a scientific or an MD is certainly not reviewed and blessed this, but it's as a computer scientist kind of guy, this is my point of view and way of constructing what's going on here. So we see on the left we've got our senses. In this case, we're going to focus around our eyes and our ears. We've got these two sensory systems feeding a ton of information into short-term sensory memory in our brain, in our mind. Then what I'm calling the mind CPU. Think of that as your conscious mind, and there's probably another process that's subconscious running. And then there's a short-term memory frame that is it's the current context of what the mind is currently evaluating. It's the current context. Like the current context for all of us is in this discussion that we're in right now. Right? It's in this PowerPoint on this display. That's the current frame of mind. Unless your mind's adrift thinking about paying bills or whatever it is else that you're thinking about, your frame of mind is focused right now on this slide. Okay, on the right we've got this associative memory. Now this is obviously just a subset of the associative memory, but we've got images and in this associative network, like the flag in the United States, the actual shape of the U.S., Paris, the Eiffel Tower, in France, this Texas map thing that we did earlier. And then there's words that anchor to each of these maps, like Texas and France and USA and many other words and images that aren't on this shown here on this map. But so what happens when the senses, the ear hears a word, hear me speak a word like Texas, okay, your eye may immediately go over to that Texas symbol, okay, and then you may notice the boots, you may notice certain things, but there's a whole complex thing. All I had to do was say Texas. Now, if you see the word Texas, your mind's going to react a little differently. So the interesting thing is, this is called in NLP different modes. A mode is a sensory mode of how the mind processes information according to these different senses. So obviously in the age of video and audio and incredible 3D graphics, all of the things we have at our disposal as marketers, it's pretty amazing, the things we have the ability to do, and the mind reacts differently depending upon the visual and other anchors, the cues that it gets through these sensory systems, and most importantly evaluates it within the frame or the current context that these senses are feeding these images and these words and sounds in. Okay, the frame is really important because the story sets the frame. Let me say that again. The frame controls how this information coming into the mind gets processed by the mind CPU. Okay, and the frame is going to govern which parts of your associative memory will become most activated, and where those maps will be built. All kinds of things get controlled. Now, I wish I had the exact map of how the mind would really work, but this is kind of my rendition as best I can represent it here, for this purposes of this discussion. So I hope this is a helpful little diagram to give you the idea, at least the concept we're talking about. So let's talk about some examples of this anchoring. So some recent examples that I'm sure you're tired of. I know I am, but there was Obama's campaign engaged in a bunch of negative anchoring, trying to anchor McCain to the unpopular Bush regime. Why? Well, because Bush had, 70-80% unpopular, rating, and so it was great to just anchor him down and make him drag that Bush anchor, behind him, and which worked very effectively. They were successful in anchoring McCain and to the incumbent's economic troubles. when in fact it probably had very little to do with Bush. In reality, it didn't matter. The economy wanted to associate the economic troubles with the current regime, okay, the Bush camp. And so McCain was also associated to the unpopular wars in Iraq. And all these were very, very effective negative anchoring that caused people's opinion of McCain and caused to drop and caused them to dislike McCain, okay, for example. And of course, McCain had their own negative anchoring list. They tried to link Obama to William Ayers, who was a domestic terrorist. Well, obviously they weren't completely successful with this, but they also tried to link Obama to raising taxes and spreading the wealth, the so-called socialism area that Joe the Plumber is now famous for bringing up. I think that was somewhat functional and maybe actually did work. And then they tried to link Obama to Acorn and voter fraud and all that. So you get the sense here of what I'm talking about. Now, as I'm going through this, did you experience any emotions on any of these topics? Did any of these kind of push a little button in you and cause you to react positively or negatively in some way? Probably more negatively than positively. Let's move on to the next slide. So there was a lot of positive anchoring that was going on. So Obama linked to Warren Buffett. Why Warren Buffett? Well, richest man in the world, he is. What does Warren Buffett equal? Money, success, expertise, somebody that we know, somebody we can trust. A trusted advisor to Obama. Well, if we had any concerns about Obama having gaps to be president, it'd be nice to know that Warren Buffett's going to be at his side, wouldn't it? That fills in those gaps very nicely in our little mind map of Obama. Obama to ending the unpopular war. Wow, what a great thing. Obama's going to be the hero that ends the war. That's a great outcome, I can imagine in my mind. Obama to middle class tax break. Well, that's resonating pretty good for if you're in the middle class. And health care for everybody. Well, so those are all positive things that starts to create a mind map that makes Obama look pretty darn sweet. McCain, of course, they tried to anchor him to winning the war and being a war hero. Unfortunately, the war is negative, so that got negated because the war was negative. And most people weren't in favor of the war, apparently. So, and McCain was a maverick and reform agent. Well, that sounds good, but I'm not sure if people believe that he's going to actually do it. And McCain to keeping taxes low. Well, okay, I think people probably do believe that. But you can see here that, and let's go back a slide here. So McCain's negative anchoring was really questionable in terms of how viable and how believable these different anchors were. Obama's anchoring, though, was very believable. Yep, McCain, his own words, says he voted with President Bush 90% of the time or so. McCain said, what is he said? We'll stay over in Iraq the next 100 years if we have to. So these were very believable statements that were made. So there's a key here in anchoring. The belief system will not let the new anchor be created unless it's believable, unless it's accepted. Okay, our filtration systems will filter it out if we don't believe it. Obviously, the Obama positive anchoring worked well. Okay, McCain's positive anchoring, it may have worked okay, but it didn't seem to work nearly as well as Obama's, given the way the election turned out. All right, well, just one last thing before I leave. So again, you notice the complex set of emotions and beliefs. These things trigger, these anchors trigger incredibly complex and juicy emotional responses within people. Like the statement about Warren Buffett or ending this war, these are incredibly powerful. Okay, so you have to be very, very careful when you select these anchors and you anchor to somebody, because there's usually a positive and a negative aspect. You just got to be very careful. These are powerful, but they can also get you into trouble if you don't choose correctly and if you don't use them carefully. All right, so when we choose the marketing anchors, we want to use the positive anchors to attract people towards the direction we want them to go. Okay, and these will be things like the results you're going to get from taking action if you buy our product, the successful outcomes and the results proof, the winning and the pleasure, all the good stuff. Okay, these are positive things to anchor to, and these can be things, events, outcomes, results, benefits, even people. Okay, like we saw with Warren Buffett, or it could be something like the war. Okay, so speaking of the war, you can use negative anchors to repel people away from the thing you don't want them to go to. Okay, or to repel them away from inaction. Okay, so there's the pain associated with the status quo, meaning you're going to continue to be in pain if you don't buy my product that provides pain relief of some kind. You're going to continue to experience difficulties and losses. And here's a story about somebody who, continued to be in pain and it continued to experience these losses and difficulties because of their inaction. And versus, here's a story of somebody who bought the product and look at the great time they had, look at what they did, look at how successful they were, from using the product. So you see how that works? So we just be very careful and explicit about choosing the anchors that you want to attract and repel. And these stories can be used in combination with anchoring to overcome objections, to push people away from the thing they're objecting to and towards making a positive decision, for example. So we want to use anchoring our marketing a couple ways. Okay, we want results stories backed up with interviews with the person. If it was a results of if it's a real story, which usually works best, interview the person. Become a reporter for 10 minutes, 15, 20 minutes. Interview them and get the full story, because you telling the story has a certain amount of oomph and impact to it. You letting that person who was in the story, the character of the story, tell their own story has 10 times the impact, okay, than you just telling the story. So if you can ever get the person who was actually in the story and interview them, it's incredibly powerful. So you need credible independent review as proof always, okay, because again, people don't trust us because we're strangers to them. We need to give them proof, and interviews with people, other third-party independent reviews, very, very powerful. Endorsements by a well-known authority figure. So why is it companies pay so much to get endorsements? Well, because these authority figures bring and convey a transitive amount of trust. I call it transitive trust. By anchoring to these authorities or celebrities, what have you, you are linking yourself to everything they stand for. Okay, you're linking to the maps that are already built within the mind of your market and your prospects that are associated with this celebrity or this authority figure. That's why endorsements work so well. It's why people pay so much for them. Okay, brand name customer cases and studies. If you're in your market can use logos and brand names in your case studies and your stories, it will also increase the impact and the believability of the stories. Okay, you also can use negative anchors, like I said earlier, examples of somebody who didn't get help, or what's going to happen, to those who don't get help, and how badly we feel for them, and put some emotion into it. Examples of the losses and the difficulties and the trials and tribulations they're going through by not having access to a product like this. And if only they could afford our product, and if only they got help. Examples illustrating the cost of not acting. So, and here's what happened, and they waited until it was too late to get help. And look at what happened to them. Look at what it cost. These don't have to be super explicit, but these stories provide a very subtle way of building these maps and anchoring within the minds of your prospects. So this subtle anchoring vehicle is very powerful, and the stories is the carrier wave that we're going to use to transmit those stories and those anchors and new maps into the minds of our prospects.